Hannity. Everybody refuses to call Sean Hannity. Sean Hannity. Nobody calls Sean Hannity. I said the war's a stupid thing. If somebody would call Sean Hannity. I spoke to Sean Hannity. Everybody refuses to call Sean Hannity. Sean Hannity. Nobody calls Sean Hannity. I said the war's a stupid thing. If somebody would call Sean Hannity. I spoke to Sean Hannity. Everybody refuses to call Sean Hannity. Sean Hannity. Nobody calls Sean Hannity. I said the war's a stupid thing. If somebody would call Sean Hannity. I spoke to Sean.
I am MD, host of the Fourth Branch program, inviting you to join me every Saturday at 10:30 a.m. and every weekday at 2 p.m. for discussions of social political issues and to dissect the meaning and the importance of current events, as well as to understand topics of legislations. The Fourth Branch Project is not associated with any political party, and we at the Fourth Branch do not have any political agenda or aspiration. Our ultimate objective is to work towards achieving a more perfect union by removing ignorance, the biggest obstacle to our democracy. Join me on our next social media broadcast. See you then. This is the Fourth Branch Project, the first and only program which is dedicated exclusively to those with common sense, a spirit of patriotism, and a determination for a more perfect union. Welcome to the Fourth Branch Program. Glad you can make it. I am MD. This program is dedicated exclusively for those with common sense, a spirit of patriotism, and a determination for a more perfect union. Stay tuned as we begin the discussion of a very important, interesting, and enlightening topic. Hope to hear from you soon. Happy listening. Hello everyone, I am MD and this is the Fourth Branch Program. We continue the discussion today about race relations in America, and we take a very quick look at the state of affairs in the country in terms of politics. First, let's talk about race relations in America. Now, if you join this program for the first time, here is where we stand. Today, in the midst of the 21st century, racism, discrimination, rampant in America. But the question that's never answered is why? Now, at first, most blame slavery for the problem. A little bit after slavery, it was really a fight between blacks and whites because of the circumstances in the country. Whites who did not want to let slavery go, and blacks, of course, who wanted to end slavery along with other whites. But over a century beyond emancipation, the end of slavery, here in America, the problem is not any different. In all fairness, the problem has exacerbated for the past few decades. The question remains, why? In order to find that out, we've been taking a look into the very institution which may hold the answer to that question, slavery. We'll return shortly to talk about slave trade, but more specifically, a period during slavery which may be the answer to the question we've all been looking for, which is the rebellion. We'll be right back. Hi, I am MD, host of the Fourth Branch Program. War on Blacks is a new topic added to the Fourth Branch Programming in order to discuss the intricacies, the complexities of race relations in America. The goal is threefold. One, to bring attention to the various forms of prejudice, discriminations, and racism in the country. Two, to expose the undeniable presence of such in every aspect of life and every corner of our society. Three, to extricate us all from the ignorance, the indifference, or the complicity. The ultimate objective is to make the discussions of those issues, racism, prejudice, discrimination, a normal part of our lives. Then, and only then, will we, as a society, be able to eradicate the problem. Martin Luther King Jr. said, "Nothing in all the world is more dangerous than sincere ignorance and conscientious stupidity. Abraham Joshua Heschel exclaimed, "Racism is man's gravest threat to man, the maximum of hatred for the minimum of reason." Join me in the journey to restore equality. Or would you please get out of the way? Thank you. Since the beginning of slavery, blacks have been fighting against a force, against a system which put in place, hinders, slow down, or even prevents blacks from achieving their own objective. Now, in order to understand what we're about to talk in terms of that period in slavery, which is the rebellion, let me give you a simple example of what had happened. In 1741, which was during slavery, there was some thoughts, some ideas as to a number of people, blacks. It was believed that there were going to be some revolt. That's in New York in 1741. There was going to be some sort of uprising, and what they did next would leave any human being speechless. Now, of course, during slavery, it really did not matter because, well, blacks were properties of whites. They did not have a voice. And in fact, there was no way in the world that blacks could defend themselves, because no matter what they said would have been construed as an assault or an insult to the whites. If a black were to be accused of something and the defense was, "No, I was not thinking about that, I did not do that," automatically it would be twisted as you accusing a white of lying, and that was a criminal offense punishable by death. Now, that wasn't in the book. I'm just using that expression, but in reality, that was the state of affairs for blacks. So if you're accused of something, there is nothing that you could do during that time that would have spared your life. As such, in 1741, a group of individual law enforcement, including judges and witnesses, made the accusation that there were going to be uprising, and of course they brought proof, they brought stories, and what authorities did at that time, they rounded up black men and they made a similarities of some trial, some mock trial, if you like, and they were all found guilty. and they were all executed. Now, imagine that for a moment. Just because someone came up with a story, and the reality is, it is found that all that was made up. There was never any such thing contemplated, not by other blacks, not by those they rounded up, just because someone who wanted to inflict more punishment on black came up with the story. It is recorded in history that it was a made-up story. But all those blacks lost their lives. Now, we could simply say it was slavery. Blacks, they didn't have any right to begin with. They could do anything that they wanted with them. They could dispose of them. They could end their lives. Then nobody would care. Now, it is an argument that as sad, as atrocious, as horrendous, as horrific that story is, you could say it happened during slavery. In 1989, a similar story happened in New York. In 1741, what I just mentioned to you happened in New York. In 1989, a similar story happened in New York. You may recall the New York City Central Park 5, the NYC 5, something to that effect, where 5 teenagers, blacks, were accused of brutalizing, raping a white woman. They were arrested, charged with the crime. Now, what makes that story in 1989, 20th century? We were at the end of the 20th century, whirling into the 21st century. The same thing that happened during slavery happened in mid-20th century. But what makes the story even more disgusting is the fact that those individuals, because you could have said that was what happened in 1741, that was during slavery, but in 20th century, we have technology. We have tools available to us that could easily provide law enforcement the answer as to what had happened. But those 5 teenagers were blacks. There were no witness whatsoever as to those teenagers were responsible for the problem. The DNA was not on the victim. Not a single one of those teenagers arrested and put in jail for the crime. There was no DNA for someone who was brutalized, raped, and murdered. None of those information put those teenagers at the place of the crime. But because they were blacks, the law enforcement tricked them into saying, yes, if they confess to the crime, they would go home. Now, think about that for a moment. Teenagers, scared, weren't supposed to be out. Now, they thought by saying, yeah, we did it, then they would go home. But little that they knew that law enforcement were just framing them to take the fall for the crime. Simply because they were black. And I say that not it was not a mistake, because at that time we had the tools available to us, to law enforcement, to determine that if those kids were responsible for the brutalized murder of a white woman, they're not expert in crime. They were as scared as any kid would be. And yet you could not find DNA of any of those kids on that individual. But they were responsible for the crime. In case you wish to know, it's because the same thing that happened in 1741, when they put that story on the block, now law enforcement needed answers. They could not provide answers, so they took 5 black teenagers and they pinned the story on them. That's all it was. There was nothing, there was absolutely nothing about that particular crime that put the teenagers on the scene, at the scene of the crime. Absolutely nothing. Except that they are blacks. Blacks, young black teenagers. That's all it took for law enforcement to concoct a story and put it on those teenagers. They spend, I don't know, 20, 30 years in jail. And to find out, as it was expected, it wasn't them, the individual who committed the crime, came forward and provided enough detail to tell those law enforcement that, yes, that was the individual who committed the crime, because the information about the crime were not public information that they released. So the individual that came forward and said, yes, I committed that crime, was able to provide information that only law enforcement would know. 1741, slavery time, stories concocted about blacks. 1989, stories concocted about blacks. That becomes a pattern in law enforcement. If they pin it on blacks, everybody's going to believe it because, well, black. This is not, those are not things as whites in general tend to think that blacks exaggerate what's happening with law enforcement. It becomes a pattern. If they pressured to find answers, to get answers, all they have to do is look for a black man. Look for black because everybody would believe it. And that did not happen by accident. And the reason I took these two stories, not because I wish to talk about the present time today, but I wish to establish the continuation of what was set during slavery time. And we're seeing that beyond slavery, the behavior of whites, the behavior of law enforcement has not changed a bit. Society has been structured to continue to wage a war on blacks. But it happened during slavery. Now, I started to talk about a gentleman by the name of John Brown. John Brown happened to be white. Give me the perfect opportunity to make the statement I've been making all along. if you've been watching this program, you already know that we've been saying that there are two groups of whites in the country. Two very large groups. Millions of whites who are racist and who discriminate. Millions of whites who are not racist, who do not discriminate. But what makes it so difficult to solve the problem of racism in America is what I just mentioned. But more specifically, now it is impossible to walk down the street and meet someone and know that that individual is racist, a white individual, because there is nothing that you can look at meeting someone in the train, at school, at the supermarket, on the street. There is no way for you to meet an individual and know that individual is racist or not. That's the dilemma, race relation in America. But we already established that there are two very distinct groups of whites. That was true during slavery, and that is true today. If you recall, during the Civil War, hundreds of thousands of individuals lost their lives on both sides. The whites who wanted to keep slavery, and the whites and the blacks who fought together to end slavery. Nothing has changed in the United States of America. You still have a large group of whites who continue to support, practice racism, discrimination. And of course you have the other side, another group who continue to fight, to oppose racism and discrimination. It would have been nice if we could identify those who are racist. In the past, as I mentioned several times in this program, they were mostly in the South, but now it's impossible to know where they're at because of migration, and of course with internet, people can easily migrate even via internet, being indoctrinated. So it is not easy to identify someone who is racist. So as such, we resort to the idea of understanding the roots of racism, at least here in the United States, by taking a look at slavery and how that sentiment has evolved in order to be able to, at the very least for now, in this period of time that we're in, to tackle that problem and hopefully eradicate racism in America. Now, in order for you to understand the sentiment that whites who are racist harbor towards blacks, we have to talk about that period during slavery, a period during which blacks decided enough was enough. They went through hell, literally speaking, a hell created by whites who were slave owners, who inflicted on those blacks treatment that would warrant them to go to jail if they were to treat animals that way today. Now, because of that, blacks changed their ways of, blacks who were slaves, changed their ways of dealing with that predicament. They started by trying to flee, escape whenever they had an opportunity. Whatever that opportunity was, they would use that. They would take advantage of the opportunity to escape slavery. Now, it was being done on an individual basis. It was done with small groups, disorganized, but nevertheless small group, who said that we could not stay in that predicament. So we had a number of uprising, revolt, crush, quell by white slave owners, by authority at that time. Now, while that was ongoing among the slaves, there were also whites who were disgusted by the practice, whites who did not approve of the practice, who were working towards putting an end to slavery. So yes, as mentioned 1,000 times, and we will continue to mention it every opportunity we have here, that here in the United States of America, there have always been two groups of whites. Those who want to keep during slavery, wanted to keep slavery around, and those who were fighting against slavery. Today, we have a group, we have whites who are racist and discriminate, and we have another group who opposes those practices. Now, there was a particular specific gentleman by the name of John Brown, a white, which I began to talk about since last week. He was not just disgusted by the practice of slavery, but he was literally, physically involved in fighting against slavery. And it wasn't just he enlisted his family to help fight slavery. We left yesterday mentioning that after he attended a meeting where they were discussing about that very problem, he became more interested in the idea of putting an end to slavery. He traveled to Kansas, where he confronted a group of a pro-slavery group. He actually killed 5 whites in Kansas, 5 pro-slavery whites. And that was in 1857, May of 1857. And he left Kansas, traveled back to east. He actually ended up in Maryland at the skirting Virginia. And there he rented a place. And that was a strategic place that would give access to Virginia, which was number one, as I mentioned before, the very first place where slaves were dropped there, the first shipment of slaves had actually occurred. The first group of slaves, 20 slaves, were dropped in Virginia, in a town called Jamestown, Virginia, at that time, which belonged to the British colony, which was rather a British colony. So John Brown decided that was a place called Harper's Ferry. That was a good place to be because it gives him access to Virginia, but well, I'm just speculating that also give him a escape route to the north, because remember, the north was not really too much into slavery. Not that there didn't any slave in the north, but it wasn't really as widespread as it was in the south. So my speculation here is John Brown picked that particular location because it gave him access, strategic access to Virginia. And again, my speculation, because Virginia was pretty much where it all began, slavery that is, where the whole thing began. The first shipment of slavery in America happened in Jamestown, Virginia. So my speculation is that John Brown wanted, even for symbolic purpose, attack the very place where slavery began. So being in Harper's Ferry, which is in Maryland, of course, gave him that strategic location for him to attack the place where slavery began, but at the same time provided that route for him to escape just in case if things didn't go well. So John Brown managed to get 22 people. That was 5 blacks, himself, 3 of his sons, and of course 14 other people. Well, 13 other people actually, because there was 22. 13 plus 4 of him and his family, 17 plus 5 blacks. Now, I also mentioned that was that time in history that for the first time blacks would become very much aware of that individual, John Brown, fighting to end slavery. But all this time, he was doing that. He even lost one of his sons in Kansas during a confrontation, but they weren't even aware that there was someone fighting for them. So yes, there have, here in the United States, it has always been that way. 2 groups of whites. One who have a group comprising obviously of millions of whites who have the decency to realize, to understand that you cannot treat human beings the way that those who are racist, who discriminate, do. So the country has always been divided that way. So John Brown decided he's going to put an end to that. Now, keep in mind, we're not talking about a civil war here, because during the Civil War, it was an all-out confrontation between 2 groups of people in the country. Those who want to keep slavery around and those who wanted to end slavery. We're not talking about that. That was before the Civil War. That was 1859. 6 years prior, John Brown wasn't even aware or could not even anticipate that Abraham Lincoln was going to go the way that he did. He could not possibly anticipate that. But he was disgusted enough by the way that white slave owners treated blacks, not just that blacks were slaves, because that was already bad enough, but the way that blacks were treated by white slave owners is enough for anyone who is a descendant of white slave ownership to renounce their family. Because while they may have gotten information telling them that those individuals were good people, they were not good people. You cannot use the word good in the same sentence as slave owners. Those two words, they do not go together. Slave owners were monsters in every sense of the word. And John Brown was well aware of that. And for that reason, he said, even at the cost of my life, at the cost of the lives of my sons. Who does that? He wasn't doing it because he was looking to a position in government. He wasn't doing that because he aspired to become a senator or governor or even a president. He was doing that just because he was disgusted by the practice. Yes, a white individual who put his own life and the lives of his own family on the line to end slavery. While at the same time you have a large group of white slave owners who could not at any point figure out what they were doing was wrong, but at the same time they were practicing Christianity, going to church. What an irony. People were doing the most evil things in life. They claimed to be Christian. And it still goes up to today. People who are doing the worst things in life, but they are Christian because they go to church. I guess that's all it takes. John Brown was not one of those people. He understood much better than blacks who were being treated, inhumanly treated, that you cannot call yourself Christian and treating people the way you're treating blacks, and at the same time pretending to be a Christian. But John Brown wasn't just talking about that. He wasn't just lamenting over that kind of problem. He decided that he was going to put an end to that horrendous practice.
Hi, I am MD, host of the Fourth Branch program. War on Blacks is a new topic added to the Fourth Branch programming in order to discuss the intricacies, the complexities of race relations in America. The goal is threefold. 1. To bring attention to the various forms of prejudice, discriminations, and racism in the country. 2.
to expose the undeniable presence of such in every aspect of life and every corner of our society. 3. To extricate us all from the ignorance, the indifference, or the complicity. The ultimate objective is to make the discussions of those issues, racism, prejudice, discrimination, a normal part of our lives. Then, and only then, will we, as a society, be able to eradicate the problem. Martin Luther King Jr. said, "Nothing in all the world is more dangerous than sincere ignorance and conscientious stupidity." Abraham Joshua Heschel exclaimed, "Racism is man's gravest threat to man, the maximum of hatred for the minimum of reason." Join me in the journey to restore equality. Or would you please get out of the way? Thank you. For the past 2 years, the country has been going through a very tumultuous time. Sometimes you have to ask the question, what exactly do we want, we, the people? You see, politicians have a way of taking advantage of those who are naive, those who are gullible, those who do not understand how the country works. Now, I'm going to take a very interesting example to try to at the very least give you a peek into the two major political parties and how members of each one of those parties, how they address their constituent and how they relate to the problem, the issues the country confronts. During the 2016 presidential election, Donald Trump went to a small town in Pennsylvania and he told the audience, his supporters, people were affected, impacted by manufactured which closed and job went overseas. Coal mining no longer a business in that part of the country. So there were, his audience comprised mostly people who want someone who want to hear that someone can do something about their predicament. Donald Trump
promised that he'll bring all those jobs back. He'll bring all those manufactured jobs back. So, hey, don't worry. I know I'm going to bring those jobs back. I know how to bring jobs back. That was Donald Trump's approach. Hillary Clinton went to the same town and she said to those same people, to those with the same problem, listen. By the way, I'm paraphrasing both candidates because I'm not quoting them here. So Hillary Clinton said, listen, those jobs, those manufactured jobs, they're gone. They're not coming back. And there is a reason for that, because obviously things, the globalization, things are changing. Technology is moving at rapid pace, and there are jobs that are, whether even if they were not to be moved out of the country, but those jobs would shrink, would start to shrink. So Hillary said, listen, we cannot turn back the clock. But if I am elected president, I will make certain that you get training for new jobs. Now, Hillary's approach, while it did not please the audience, but was true, because that's indeed the case in the world, that manufactured jobs, they do not just leave a particular region or a particular country, but they also shrinking, because technology is helping to make that happen. So the approach that Hillary pointed to those individuals who lost their job to manufacture that were closed were actually accurate. The approach was accurate, and the suggestion, not that necessarily I know that was going to happen, but nevertheless the suggestion was a logical suggestion, and if she were to keep her word, that would have been a logical approach to the problem. In other words, Hillary took the path that was more possible to implement. So Hillary didn't lie. Donald Trump, on the other hand, lied to those people. Literally lied to those people. Say, don't worry, I'm going to bring those jobs back to you. Now, I took that example for a specific reason. Not to talk necessarily about Donald Trump, but to talk about Republicans in general. Now, the audience went with Donald Trump because all that they wanted to hear is bring the job back. But realistically, this type of promise by a candidate would usually be just that, a promise. Because logically, the candidate would not be able to deliver on that promise. Now, the difference, if you've been watching politics for the past few decades, you would notice that the difference between Democrats
and Republicans, Democrats are more inclined to tell you what is, what's possible, what's not possible. Republicans, they tell you what you want to hear. This is what I call deception. That's not politics. Because when someone tells you something, they know what they're telling you is a lie. That's not politics. That's deception. Now, don't get me wrong. You could say something to your constituent and you may not necessarily be able to deliver, but not because you started out by trying to deceive your constituent. There is a big difference. Now, I can extend the Hillary example where she said that I would, if I'm elected, I would get you training so that you can get no job. Now, it's logical and it's possible, but it could also, let's say for sake of argument, that she was elected. Now, she would have to contend with money for that training. In other words, she would have to fight to get that money to provide the training that she promised to those people. Now, if she succeeded getting the money, she would have delivered on her promise. But if she did not succeed, then that promise would not have been met, would not be met. In a sense, she did not lie to the constituent, despite the fact that she did not deliver. Now, for the constituent, it would be pretty much the same thing. But in the long run, it is not. Because if you watch how, for the past few decades, Republicans have been conducting themselves, you cannot call what they do in politics. It's deception. Here's an example that happened just not too long ago, in 2017. They came out with a tax cut, knowing that the majority of the major part of the money that they were going to borrow, the $1.5 trillion, not something that happened by accident. They knew because they were the one drafting the legislation. They knew that $1.3 trillion out of that money were allocated for large corporations and wealthy individuals. So that's not a mistake. That's not something that happened by accident. They crafted the legislation, but they went out there telling the constituent, we're giving you a tax cut. Which means they deliberately deceive the constituent. This is not a mistake. This is deception. But even worse, they did not tell, they put 0.2 trillion, meaning $200 billion on the side to distribute among everybody in the country. But $1.3 trillion, that's more than 85% of the money, went to large corporations and wealthy individuals. They also forgot to mention to the constituent, I'm just kidding when I say forgot. I'm being sarcastic here. To the constituent that we, the people, are responsible for the whole 1.5. we only got 0.2 of that, but we're responsible for the whole 1.5. That is deception, not politics. So when you hear reports saying that Republicans are playing politics, Republicans don't play politics. Those things that they do are deception. Very deceptive ways of convincing the constituent to support them. That is a crisis for the country. And the reason is because not only we have legislators literally, continuously, consistently deceiving the constituent, deceiving we the people, but there is a large group of individuals, mainly the Republicans, who support that. They're naive enough to believe those who have deceived them over and over and over again. And as such, the country is in the predicament it is today. Not by accident. We have the legislators, those who are supposed to be leaders. They're supposed to be leaders. Leaders do not use deception as a way to get things done. That's why I say they're supposed to be leaders. But they use deception as their tool to convince the constituent to continue to support them. That is a crisis for the country.
Join me here on the Fourth Branch at 10:30 a.m. every Saturday. And every weekday at 2 p.m. This is the Fourth Branch.
Common sense in a world of chaos.
This program will resume in just a moment.
I do thank you for spending the time with me, and I hope this information provide you some sort of enlightenment. In the meantime, if you have questions, suggestions, comments, criticism, do not hesitate to contact us. And if you have a topic you would like us to discuss on the Fourth Branch, please drop us a line. We will research it and we will debate here on the Fourth Branch. Have a wonderful afternoon.
I am MD, host of the Fourth Branch program, inviting you to join me every Saturday at 10:30 a.m. and every weekday at 2 p.m. for discussions of social political issues
and to dissect the meaning and the importance of current events, as well as to understand topics of legislations. The Fourth Branch Project is not associated with any political party, and we at the Fourth Branch do not have any political agenda or aspiration. Our ultimate objective is to work towards achieving a more perfect union by removing ignorance, the biggest obstacle to our democracy. Join me on our next social media broadcast. See you then.
The Fourth Branch Podcast is brought to you in collaboration with the People Branch publication, which can be found on the People Branch website, located at peoplebranch.org. That's peoplebranch.org. That's peoplebranch.org website, in which you will find a number of very interesting articles. My name is Mike Duchesne, MD for short. I hope you have a great afternoon or a great evening, whichever it happens to be. Hopefully you can join me again next time for another interesting episode of this podcast. That was the Fourth Branch, live from New York. Good day.